Have you ever noticed how, like, as you move up in your career, things kind of shift? Like, it becomes less about actually doing the work itself and more about making sure the work can happen.
Yeah.
Like getting the resources and the buy-in and all of that. So today we're doing a deep dive on that whole thing, how to advocate for what you need to actually get things done, especially as you, get to those higher levels.
You're totally right. It's like a hidden hurdle a lot of people don't see coming.
Yeah.
They're used to being like the star player, crushing it on their own, and suddenly the game changes.
Right.
Now it's about leading the team, making sure everyone else has what they need to win.
And that's a whole different skill set.
For sure.
It's interesting because the source we're looking at today, it actually says that at the executive level, securing resources, and that's a whole different skill set. Like, it's not just a means to an end, it's the accomplishment itself.
That's a really good point. And they had a really good example. Instead of going to your boss and just being like, we need to hire more people, which is kind of like what we're used to doing.
Yeah.
You have to turn it into like a pitch almost.
Oh, interesting.
Like, if we invest in 2 more developers right now, we could launch this project a whole quarter ahead of schedule, and that's potentially an extra $10 million in revenue.
Wow. So instead of just saying what you need, you're giving them a mini business case every single time.
Exactly. You're speaking their language, you know? Like, up at that senior level, they're thinking strategy. They want to see how your request connects to the company's larger goals. And this is huge. You got to back it up with cold, hard data.
Data. Okay.
Senior leaders don't just want enthusiasm, they want evidence.
So it's not enough for me to just be like, oh, hey, I'm seeing our competitors kill it with their marketing campaigns and we're falling behind. We need a bigger budget. Like, that's not going to cut it.
Nope.
I need to come in with the numbers.
Exactly.
Show them, okay, competitor X, their market share has grown this much in the past quarter. Ours has dropped by this much. So to regain our competitive edge, we need to invest this much more in marketing, and here's why.
Now you're getting it. That kind of data-driven approach that shows you're not just complaining, you've done your research. You understand the big picture.
Okay, so data.
It's crucial.
But I'm guessing it's not just about the numbers, right?
You got it.
There's got to be that human element too, like we always talk about.
Oh, absolutely. The source really emphasizes this whole idea of collaboration. It's like executive advocacy thrives on relationships. You need to have those alliances with other leaders where you're both winning.
Show them how their success is your success.
Exactly.
Okay, so instead of me going to like the VP of operations and being like, we need a bigger budget, I should go to them and say, look, if my team had a new software system, it would streamline this process and you guys would actually save this much money or we would be this much more efficient.
There you go.
Interesting.
You're not just advocating for your little bubble, you're showing how your work impacts the entire company.
And everybody wins.
Exactly. That's how you get people on board.
Okay, so that makes sense. And to do that, I guess you have to really keep your finger on the pulse of what matters most to the people at the top right.
You hit it right on the head. And that's something people really underestimate.
Yeah.
Like, just because a project was a top priority a few months ago doesn't mean it still is up there.
Right. Priorities change.
All the time. Market conditions, competitor moves, even internal stuff can shift their focus.
So how do you stay ahead of that curve? How do you make sure you're not caught off guard when those priorities change? So it's like you're constantly checking, is this still relevant? Like, okay, they loved Project X last quarter, but is that still their focus? What's the top priority right now, and how does my work connect to that?
It's like a constant relevance check, exactly. And it takes being proactive. You can't just wait for someone to be like, so what are you working on these days?
Yeah.
You have to keep them in the loop.
Right.
So maybe you schedule a quick meeting with your boss, or even just like a quick email that reframes your team's progress, through the lens of whatever the company's latest goals are.
Oh, that actually reminds me of this time I was working on this big product launch.
Okay, yeah.
We had gotten the initial go-ahead and everything, and then the company decided to completely shift their focus to international expansion.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly my little domestic launch was like, not that important anymore, in the grand scheme of things.
I bet. What did you do?
Well, instead of just panicking, I sat down and I was like, okay, how can I connect this to the international goals? Like, how can I make this relevant to them?
Yeah.
And I realized that if we included a few key features that were tailored to the international market in our initial release, it would actually pave the way for a much smoother global rollout later on.
Smart.
Yeah. So I basically reframed my project as like this strategic stepping stone to a larger company objective.
That's brilliant. You turned a potential obstacle into an asset.
Exactly. And when I presented it that way and I showed them the data on potential international adoption rates and the long-term cost savings of doing it this way, I had everyone back on board.
That is a perfect example of how even when it feels like things are shifting under your feet, you know?
Yeah.
You can use those executive advocacy skills to not just survive, but to really thrive.
It's about being agile.
Yeah.
You know, like thinking on your feet and anticipating those changes.
Yeah.
So we talked about how to frame our needs in a way that's compelling, how to stay aligned with those shifting priorities. But what about when it's time to actually make the ask? Like, what are some practical tips for advocating effectively at the executive level?
Well, the source had some really good advice about that. And it starts with something we've already touched on, building those relationships.
Yeah, you can't just like email someone out of the blue or show up at their office with a list of demands.
No way.
Yeah.
They actually recommend like actively cultivating those relationships with other leaders, you know?
Yeah.
Like grabbing lunch, going for coffee, attending industry events together, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. It's like that saying, people want to do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Exactly.
But it's more than just schmoozing, right? It's about genuinely connecting with your colleagues, understanding their perspective.
Absolutely. And when you understand where they're coming from, it's much easier to show them how your needs can also support their success.
Because it's a two-way street.
Exactly.
Interesting. So build relationships, speak the language of ROI, anticipate objections. It's like we're building a whole toolkit here.
I like it.
And speaking of which, the source also talks about using the language of ROI. What does that actually look like in practice?
So at that executive level, everything comes down to return on investment. They want to know, if we invest in this, what are we going to get back?
Okay, that makes sense.
The source really stressed that you need to clearly articulate that value proposition. Like, don't just say, we need a new software system because ours is from the Stone Age, right? Instead, you'd say something like, investing in this new system, it's projected to reduce customer churn by 10%, which would increase our customer lifetime value by X amount of dollars.
Oh, so you're putting it in terms of their bottom line. Instead of just speaking in generalities, give them concrete numbers.
Data is your best friend.
Okay.
Because it shows the financial impact of what you're asking for.
That is super helpful.
Yeah.
But even with all the right data, even with a killer pitch, there's always a chance someone's going to push back, right? Like, how can I anticipate and handle those objections effectively?
That is such a crucial part of this, and it's something that people often forget about. The source actually had a really good analogy. They said it's like playing chess.
Ooh, I like that.
You have to be thinking several moves ahead, anticipating your opponent's next move.
Okay, so how do I apply that to, like, you know, an office setting? How do I anticipate objections like that?
So before you go into any meeting where you're going to be presenting an idea or making a request, take some time to really put yourself in the decision maker's shoes.
Okay.
What kind of questions might they have? What are their concerns going to be? For example, if you're asking for a bigger budget, their first thought might be, well, how is this going to impact our profitability?
So instead of waiting for them to bring it up, I can address those concerns right in my proposal.
Exactly. When you can show them that you've already anticipated potential roadblocks, it shows that you're like 2 steps ahead.
You're not just reacting, you're already prepared.
And it makes you so much more credible because it shows you've really thought things through.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But what if, like, even if I do all of that, what if I still get pushback?
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Not every idea is going to be met with like a standing ovation, and that's okay.
So what do you do?
The key is to stay flexible.
Okay.
Don't get so married to your idea that you're not open to hearing other perspectives.
So, like, don't dig in your heels and get defensive.
Exactly. Instead of seeing pushback as a failure, try to see it as an opportunity.
Okay.
An opportunity to understand where they're coming from, maybe even more than you did before.
Yeah.
So ask questions, really listen, and try to find that common ground.
So maybe there's a compromise somewhere.
Exactly.
This has been so eye-opening. I think it's so easy to get caught up in just doing the work, you know?
Yeah.
And forget that we have to advocate for ourselves and our teams and our projects. Like, it's a whole other skill set.
It really is.
We covered so much ground today, from framing our needs in a way that actually resonates to building those key relationships to anticipating those objections. It's a lot.
And don't forget about staying adaptable.
Oh, right. Because those priorities can change, like, overnight sometimes.
Exactly. You got to be ready to pivot.
Okay, so for our listener who maybe is earlier in their career, or maybe they haven't had to do a lot of this advocacy stuff yet, what's like a small step they can take this week to start building those muscles?
Ooh, that's a good question. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Like you don't have to go out and pitch $1 million project tomorrow.
Right.
But maybe reach out to someone in a different department, someone you wouldn't normally talk to, and just learn more about what they do.
Interesting.
See if there are ways you could collaborate. Or even just practice how you would frame a request for something you need,
Yeah.
But do it in a way that highlights the ROI, like we talked about.
So like a little mini practice run?
Exactly.
I like it.
Because even those small actions can make a big difference in how you're perceived.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for diving deep with me today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, keep in mind that your success isn't just about the work you do. It's about your ability to communicate the value of that work and rally the support you need to make amazing things happen.
Well said.
Until next time, keep diving deep.